An airplane leaves New York City and heads towards Los Angeles. As it climbs, the plane gradually increases its speed until it reaches cruising altitude, at which time it maintains a constant speed for several hours as long as it stays at cruising altitude. After flying for 32 minutes, the plane reaches cruising altitude and has flown 192 miles. After flying for a total of 92 minutes, the plane has flown a total of 762 miles. Determine the speed of the plane at cruising altitude in miles per minute. So here we're measuring time in minutes and we're measuring miles. So you want to remember what we actually want to calculate is the slope, the change in y over the change in x. So after 92 minutes, the plane flew 762 miles. So 762 is our change in y, and 92 minutes would be our x. Now, when we reached cruising altitude, we were at 192 miles. So it's 762 minus that 192. And we had flown for 32 minutes, so our time was 32. So now we just calculate our slope. 762 minus 192 is 570. 92 minus 32 is 60. And if they both end in 0, we can simplify that as 57 over 6 miles per minute. So that's the first half of this question. Now, this is a multi-point question, so there are extra parts that weren't included. But I just wanted to show you what they were to say, even though the questions are bigger, doesn't mean it's that much harder. So the rest of the question says, write an equation to represent the number of miles the plane has flown, y, during x minutes at cruising altitude only. So we're saying if we know what cruising altitude speed is, we should be able to write an equation. And all we're doing is saying y equals the slope times x. So this, we already had the slope. This is just create an equation with it, and that's fine. Now, the next part, because all of this builds on what we did before. So now we're going to use the information from those first two sections to answer the final part of the question. Assuming the plane maintains its speed at cruising altitude, determine the total number of miles the plane has flown 2 hours into flight. Here's where we have to do a little work, some reasoning. Remember, the first 32 minutes involved takeoff. So we have to consider the 32, and we have to consider those first 192 miles. They're part of what that plane flew in the first 2 hours. So our scale says 2 hours converts to 120 minutes. Make sure you're using the scale that they want you to use. We're looking about miles per minute here. So x, what we're going to put into this equation, cannot include the 32 because that's a different set altogether. So we have to do that 120 minus 32, and that calculates to 88. So the x that we're going to put in the equation is actually 88. So we take our equation, y equals 57 over 6 times x. But the other detail is, in that 32 minutes, we flew 192 miles. So we've got to add the 192 to this equation because that happened in the first 2 hours. And that. So we have y equals 57 over 6 times the 88. And then we add the 192. When we go through and calculate that, y equals 1,028 miles in that 2 hour time